live. We should be live right now. Hello to everyone that is tuning in. This is the Duran live number 32. If you guys can see us, give us a shout out in the chat if you can hear us. And if the mic levels are okay, give us a shout out in the chat as well. Let's see, Valius from USA, Ohio. Hello, Valley. We have from Honolulu. All right, Susan, thank you for joining us from Honolulu, 5 a.m. Vancouver Island. From France, Elaine, thank you, France, for joining us as well. All right, guys, how does it look? You should be seeing the three of us here. We've, whoa. One sec, got some feedback here. All right, everything should be okay now. Great. Okay. Claire from Paris, Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Awesome. California.
Great place, Cape Cod.
You been there, Peter?
Yeah,
yeah, nice. Yeah, really nice. Hello, Pax Bella, loud and clear. All right, great. All right, the Duran Live 32. Welcome, everybody, to our 32nd live broadcast. Hotel get back to the three of us. Alexander, Hotel California. Is that what everyone's feeling like in the UK?
I think pretty much, and I think that's true of everybody. I mean, not what irrespective of what your view on Brexit is. I mean, I read an article somewhere which said, some people voted leave, some people voted remain, but what we've actually got is limbo. I mean, we don't know where we are. We don't know where we're going in a few weeks. There's no certainty. And there's no obvious exit, which is awful. I mean, it's a terrible situation.
There's no obvious leadership. That's why we're in this.
Well, we've got one man in Moscow who has broken out of the Hotel California. Literally has broken out of California. We have live in Moscow, Mr. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Hello, Peter. How are you?
All right. I'm glad I'm not in the Hotel California. That's for damn sure.
All right. And we have in London, the Oracle of London, a man who is inside the Hotel California at this very moment.
And craving to escape. But there we go.
Mr. Alexander Mercouris. How are you, Alexander?
I'm very well, actually. It's a beautiful day. I've just walked my dogs. I put all the Brexit thoughts to one side for a couple of hours. So now I'm refreshed and ready to face it all again.
Now that it's April Fool's Day, let's get this over with, okay? And hopefully we don't get too many questions that are April Fool's Day. But I think the best April Fool's Day joke I saw was Brexit crisis is over. Europe joins the UK. Okay? Brexit's over, okay?
What would be the backstop for that?
Theresa May's brain, I don't know.
All right, welcome everybody to our live chat. Let's see where people are checking in from. Holland, Transylvania, from France, an Englishman in France. All right, hello from South Africa. Hello, Vasia, how are you? FL Treasure from Orlando, Florida. Hello, Orlando. Hello, someone. Let's see, Goberwala, hello. Good to have you here. Okay. Can you rip Trudeau one today, Peter, please? And thank you from Jonathan. We actually have some news on Trudeau, to be honest. I think he had some bad news. Some more bad news on his scandal that he's going through.
There was a tape. There was a tape, wasn't there, which caught one of his people. Was it Mr. Butts or whatever?
Yeah.
Attorney General.
Yeah, something going on there. So, okay, everybody, welcome to our live. Let's get started. We have a lot of big topics to cover. Send us your super chats. We will try to answer all the questions as well as your super chats as we go through this 32, live number 32. Remember to smash that like button. Share the channel with everybody you know. If you're not subscribed, also please subscribe to our channel as well. You can also get a Duran shirt. Remember to get a Duran shirt. The link is in the description box down below. And you can donate to us via PayPal and Patreon as well. Every little bit helps, and we thank everyone who has donated to us via PayPal or Patreon. We really, really appreciate it. You guys are great, and we appreciate all your donations. Thank you very, very much. Alexander, you want to kick things off with a little Brexit? Little Brexit news?
Absolutely.
No such thing as little Brexit.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, today we now have once again these indicative votes. And we've had a very bizarre weekend. Lots of scheming, lots of plotting, all to no real purpose, as is the story of Brexit all along. So on Friday, Theresa May's proposal was turned down for a third time. She's now talking about bringing it forward for a fourth time, which seems to be absolutely bizarre. We've got Sir Oliver Letwin, who is this grand Tory grandee, who is an ardent Remainer. He's now arranging to have these so-called indicative votes in the House of Commons today, which are supposed to lead to a customs union proposal with the EU as the way to break Brexit, break through the impasse on Brexit. And of course, we've also had lots of talk, some of it originating with Theresa May, that there should be a general election. And Alex and Peter will remember that I've discussed the strong possibility of a general election. But what then happened, the moment that was suggested, most of the Labour Party and pretty much the whole of the Conservative Party and large sections of the media went absolutely berserk when the suggestion was made. The very last thing they want is a general election, because they're terrified that that will bring Jeremy Corbyn in as Prime Minister. So we are in a situation where there's an awful lot of talk, an awful lot of scheming, no very clear way forward. And on the 10th of April, the European Council is going to meet. And to be absolutely clear, that's where the real decision is now going to be made. So this whole programme, this whole idea of Brexit, which is all about taking back control as a result of the utter incompetence of Theresa May and the British political class's leadership, and the extreme pro-Euro attitudes of so many of them. Instead of taking back control, we have lost it, and the European Union now has more control over Britain's destiny than it has ever had.
So you're still in the European Union, but you have far less control than you did before this process started.
Well, indeed, absolutely, because it is the European Council, people like Donald Tusk and Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, which are going to decide on the 10th of April the future of Britain. You know, as a patriotic Briton, I am very, very upset and extremely angry.
The irony, of course, historically, is that Britain has had such sway over the last 500 years, I think I can say safely, over so many parts of the world. And now it's from the outside looking in, it looks absolutely hopeless and hapless to be able to control its own destiny. This is a world historic event, and history will remember it that way. And then, of course, you have, outside meddling. John Bolton comes out and say, well, the UK will be first in the queue for a trade deal. Okay, wow. That's like talking to a used car dealer. Okay, wow. I wonder what kind of sovereignty Britain is going to have to sacrifice to the United States for a trade deal. I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing happening all over again. For me, this is a lack of leadership. And I have to say, I've said this all along, and I suppose there's no empirical evidence right now. But I'm sorry, Alexander, but this seems like May's plan. No plan.
Well, whether it's May's plan or not, it is the result. And in terms of the result, there is nothing that you said I can disagree with.
All right. Some of you guys may have seen two Alexanders pop up there. This is a new software that we're moving away from Hangouts. So if you saw two Alexanders, 2 or 3, the more Alexanders, the better.
The more the better.
So now I think we got that all sorted out. All right. So thank you, Valies, for your super chat. We really appreciate it. Peter, what are your thoughts on Brexit and what's going on in the UK?
I think it is a representation of the lack of leadership all across the Western world. I really believe that here, where it has gotten down to the politics of administration and not of politics per se. Because, and we're going to discuss it a little bit later, but I mean, it's no coincidence this melees has prompted intense censorship strategies all across the Western world. What we're doing right now is what they don't want us to do. They don't want us to debate because among themselves they do not. Okay, they quibble. I mean, I am not an expert on British law, but it seems like the most arcane, obscure things are being thrown into the mix. You have a Speaker of the House of Commons, which, you know, I nominally, deep in the recesses of my mind, knew there was probably a speaker. He looks like he's running the show, okay?
Yeah,
I mean,
he is.
Really quite extraordinary, and how biased he is towards Theresa May and the remainders. So, I mean, you know, I watched these debates. I was really lucky last Friday because I was asking you on What's Up, when's going to be the debate? And, you know, I did some shopping. I did a few things. And then I just turned it on and it was like right there it started. And I saw the whole thing from beginning to finish. And I thought, this is theater. This is kabuki theater. You know, everybody goes through their motion, but nothing happens as a result. And what's interesting this time around is that you have segments of the Labour Party and you have segments of the Tories that are working in conjunction, in unison. And of course, you know, that denies any kind of majority to do anything moving forward. I mean, you have to have a new election. That's when you need a new election. Who cares? Forget Brussels. It's your country's fate. And that's the way it has to be done. And if it's Jeremy comes into power, then you regret it and you lament it, well, then you lament the democratic process then and stop exporting it then. If you don't like it how it works in your own country, stop exporting it at the end of a barrel of a gun.
All true. Can I just say one thing, Peter? You're absolutely right about the Speaker. John Bercow has played a very, very big role in creating the chaos that we've seen. Yes, we do have an archaic constitution. No doubt it does need a lot of reform, but when it is managed properly, it actually works reasonably well. When you have a speaker who throws out the rule book in the way that Bercow has done, obviously that creates chaos. And we see it with what is happening this afternoon, because with these indicative votes, any proper speaker would have ruled them out of order. He wouldn't have allowed them to happen at all, because they are a gross violation of the principle, the basic constitutional principle accepted in Britain of the separation of powers. If the government, elected government, doesn't want to do something because it is contrary to the policy under which it is elected, you do not get Parliament to force that government to do what it doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
What you do is you change the government, which the House of Commons, to be clear, has the power to do. Bercow has completely muddled things up, and that is one of the major reasons why we are in this crisis at the moment.
No, I want just a point of order here. I'm not criticizing the Constitution itself. I'm saying witnessing people use arcane elements of it as a form of obstruction. Okay, I just want to be clear there. Okay, because it seems like intentional obstructionism to wear everyone down. This is what a fourth vote. Is this woman out of her mind?
Well, I know.
Really?
I mean that is
come on. I mean that's an insult to the voters. That's an insult to the system. It's an insult to the entire democratic process. Okay,
yes.
She has failed to fulfill her promise, and she must go. She must go. Yes. She should have gone months ago. She should have gone after the first vote.
Absolutely.
It just shows to me her arrogance and her selfishness. She has put her interest and the interests of some members of her party above the nation, and that is just completely unacceptable and despicable, really.
Absolutely. Perhaps I could just explain what should have happened, because I mean there would have been a very simple solution to this. When Theresa May put forward her proposal to the House of Commons in January, and it was rejected by 230 votes, a majority of 230, she should have resigned. As Peter says, a new Prime Minister should have been appointed, he would have had to be appointed by the Conservative Party. And that Prime Minister, whoever it was, should then have proceeded to do the only thing that was possible and consistent with the Conservative Party's election manifesto and the will of the British people as set out in the referendum result and in the parliamentary elections which happened in June 2017. That was proceed to Brexit, and that would have had to be a no-deal Brexit. That is what should have happened. If that had happened, we would not be in the crisis that we are in now.
The interesting thing is, too, is that we keep focusing on the incompetence of Theresa May and her government, which we should. But we also should look at the behavior and strategies of Brussels. Again, I use the term world historic moment because we can kind of invoke the Hotel California rule. But, you know, it really puts into question, is the European Union a organization where you have the right to leave? You may have the right to request to become part of the club, but can't you just as easily say that you want to leave? And apparently the answer is no. So it shows the inadequacies and the lack of democracy and the lack of self-determination within the European Union itself. So the two sides of the same coin here is that when you vote for someone, they say they're going to do something, they should be held accountable. And the European Union should also be held accountable on how it rules itself, all right? So, and it always gets down to the elites are doing this, okay? They deny this across the entire union right now, self-determination. But that is a pillar of what Western political society is all about, and it's being denied and put into check.
No. Yeah.
Alexander, can you comment about Nigel Farage and what he's up to?
Well, I think Nigel Farage has two strategies. At the moment, and we've just done a video, which I think you've just published,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes, I have.
in which we saw this extraordinary clash between him and Verhofstadt at the European Parliament. By the way, I should say that the British media has reported extensively on Verhofstadt's comments. They practically ignored what Farage had to say. But what Farage is trying to do in the European Parliament and in talking to the Europeans is something which no British politician seems to have the sophistication to do, which is to say to the Europeans, look, it is in your interest to have us go. And at the summit meeting on the 10th of April, you should vote against granting us a further extension and let us leave on a no-deal basis. Now, he's the only politician who does that and knows how to do it and is able to do it in a way that addresses some of the genuine interests and concerns that the Europeans actually have. Oh, that was a clever speech. But the other thing he's trying to do is he's trying to set up his own party and mobilize and prepare both for the European Parliament elections, which it is now very likely that Britain will participate in, despite all the assurances that we've multiple times been given that it wouldn't, and for the general election that I think everybody now acknowledges is to come. So one way or another, what he is manoeuvring to do is to do what he succeeded in doing before 2016, which is to re-establish an authentic Brexit party as a genuine political force in British politics. After he resigned from the leadership of UKIP in 2016, that force in Britain has been lacking. Yeah. And that is one reason why we have got into the situation that we have. If Nigel Farage had still been there, still leading UKIP, still threatening Conservative and Labour MPs in their constituencies by threatening to win over Leave voters angry with what was going on in Westminster, I am sure that we would not have the present disastrous situation that we have. But better late than never. I think he realizes now that he made a big mistake to remove himself from the political scene in 2016, and now he's trying to reorganize and to put things back together again so that he can achieve that. Can I say again, if you follow his speech in the European Parliament, and I urge people to see that video Alex and I did and to listen to our discussion that preceded it, you will see what a very clever and effective politician Nigel Farage is. It is a tragedy he is not in the House of Commons putting the case for Brexit now.
Alex, is he a spent force because he left in 2016?
No, I don't think he's a spent force. I think he thought to himself back in 2016 that there was really no point in him continuing in politics anymore because Brexit was going to happen. Now that it's looking increasingly likely that Brexit in any meaningful sense isn't going to happen, the reasons that made him such a powerful figure in British politics before 2016 have re-emerged with a vengeance, and I expect him to become a powerful force in British politics again. And I think when you see how he speaks, both to the Europeans and to the British people themselves, and the grasp of British history that he has, very few British politicians seem to have anymore, and his ability to talk and respond quickly to comments like those that Verhofstadt made, you see what a formidable political operator he is.
Mm. Peter, can you comment on what you think Macron's influence is with Brexit? Do you think he's going to actually stop it? Do you think he has that kind of sway to take a hard line?
I don't think so.
I think Merkel beat him down.
Berlin still has sway here. However, he's looking for a political opening here. With his domestic policies in disarray, he is looking to be the Napoleon or whatever figure he wants to play, the sun god or whatever of Europe after this crisis passes, if and when it will pass, and it may start a further and deeper crisis within the European Union itself, because I think we see the stirrings of that already. And because whatever form Brexit takes, people are still going to take away from it, but they did get out. They did get out, and that'll be a precedent. And that's the precedent that the EU leadership dreads. They dread the precedent. But Macron, I mean, he's an empty suit. I mean, I think he's proven that over and over again. So, I mean, talk's cheap, okay? And, he can keep spouting off, but I don't think he has a whole lot of traction. During, it's really interesting. When Trump and Putin were in Paris last year, and he was, he gave his nationalism speech. Nationalism and patriotism are the opposite. Now he's a philosopher king. He came off very bad. Who was at the center? It was Trump and Putin. He couldn't even be the leader in his own city, in his own country for a few hours. He couldn't be the man in the center. No, he was a cutaway. He was a footnote to his own event. And what people remember from it is he got just pillared for his ridiculous comments. And so it's really hard to take him seriously. And the stakes are really high here. And I don't think anyone's going to let that kid play with it, okay? I mean, he's good for photo ops.
Let that kid play with it.
A big black man he likes to hug. That's his shtick, okay? Good for you, okay? If that floats your boat, fine. But I don't think anyone in the European Union seriously looks to Paris right now as being a mover and a shaker. And of course, for the European Union, the double whammy is that you really have the sunset on Merkel's very long and not very distinguished career. I mean, with the immigration, she really blew it. She'll be remembered very badly in history for doing that, because the immigration problem is a problem created by the European Union, and they have no answers to it, none whatsoever. That's why they want. I'm going to keep going back to this. They want to censor everything. They want to censor political debate because they'll never acknowledge the mistakes they have made, because they are like they're like a papal bull. They're infallible, okay? But the people are telling them over and over and over again that they have failed.
Alexander, a question from Tobias. Why are you so pro-Brexit?
Well, actually, I'm going to go straight to the point about this. I wasn't initially. I wasn't sure. I mean, I thought that there were possible arguments one way or the other. I'm not pro-Brexit. I'm pro-democracy. The people of Britain in 2016 voted in a referendum held under democratic principles, called by Parliament, to leave the European Union. Now, I am somebody who was born in a country, that's to say in Greece, at a time when democracy was challenged. I saw what happened when a dictatorship was imposed there. I take democracy extremely seriously. I don't believe that the obsessions and the wishes of the minority should be privileged over those of the majority in a democratic vote. And I think a promise given to the people in 2016 to lead that, and a referendum result will be adhered to, should be honoured and seen through. Now, if Britain leaves the European Union on a no-deal basis, personally, I don't expect this economic disaster that people are talking about. I think if after a couple of years, say 5 or 10 or wherever, perhaps Britain decides to rejoin an EU that may have changed significantly in that time, perhaps for the better, well, so be it. But in 2016, they voted to leave. And that, for me, is decisive.
Okay, let's switch gears. Peter, with Trump. Trump said that he is going to declassify the FISAs. Steve Bannon said that Trump is now going to hit back, and he's going to hit back hard. What do you make of Bannon's comments?
What was the phrase? He's going to go total animal.
He's going to go total animal on his enemies, I think you said.
Yeah.
Enemies or deep state, something like that. What do you make of the fact that now supposedly the Russia Gate and the Mueller is behind him, the Mueller investigation is behind him, and now Trump has a little bit of room to breathe to drain the swamp? Let's say if he's checking off lists on his campaign promises, drain the swamp was right up there with the wall. What do you make of Trump, Bannon's comments about Trump going forward?
I think what Trump is going to do is he's going to rely, and I don't think there'll be any kind of collusion, God, I hate that word now, or conspiracy, but I think William Barr has a pretty good lay of the land right now. He knows the other shoe has to drop. Now do you have to go after the people that made up this conspiracy? And it's pretty. We've got the basic narrative down pat. Okay, lots of little details. Who are the FISA judges? There's going to be a whole reassessment of the FISA courts, which I think they should be. All of the secrecy stuff it was open to abuse, and you know what? It was abused. Also, he's relying heavily upon Lindsey Graham. And I think, from Trump's point of view, that's really very smart. Trump is on a victory lap right now. I think he has his gut feeling, and his gut got him elected. Don't go vindictive, okay? Be mocking, fine. But don't go vindictive, because it'll look like he's using the power of the federal government against his enemies, which the guy that was in office before him did exactly that, Barack Obama. So I think he's going to be careful. He's going to take advantage of the Mueller report until November 2020, and I think he's got enough smarts to realize don't spoil that. All right, and all the while Barr is going to be doing his, and you're going to have inside of the Justice Department there's a review going on. So it's all going to percolate up. And I think Trump will be focused on being presidential. I mean, the Democratic field, it's quite laughable. They're all a bunch of cartoon characters. And I don't see any one of them even coming close. So if Trump just keeps it going the way it is right now, the economy isn't in recession, and he doesn't stupidly listen to John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, because I think, Trump better be careful, because Bolton and Pompeo can bring his presidency to an end. because I don't think they better not underestimate how much people do not want these foreign interventions anymore. They're sick and tired of it. What Trump needs to do, I've been vindicated, and when is that damn Congress going to get around to get some infrastructure in this country? That's a winning message. That's a winning message, all right? He closes the southern border. Look, I'm not on the southern border. I'm in the middle of Russia right now. But the fake news of MSNBC and CNN and the rest of them, that there's no crisis at the border. There is a crisis at the border. There's a crisis of institutions. And I think Trump is going to, he'll move in that direction. I think he should. He has the right to. He has every right under the Constitution of the United States to secure the borders of the United States. And don't listen to all this ridiculous nonsense every single night on CNN and MSNBC. It's really, I mean, Russiagate was a disgrace, and their whole description of what's going on the southern border is equally disgraceful. Trump needs to stay to his promises. Don't get into foreign wars. Secure the borders. And if there's no recession, he can win.
Vegan for the Planet, Peter says Trump surrounded himself with the swamp, Bolton, Pompeo, etc.
Yeah, you know, everyone knows. I mean, this is our 36th live cast. 32. I've been saying it every single one. Alex Christoforou and I have said over and over again, he's got bad HR policy, and it's fair to say. I think it's a fair description that he's allowed himself. He hasn't embraced the swamp, but he's allowed the swamp to embrace him. That is a mistake. But I think if you look at the way Trump thinks and talks and acts, he just wants to delegate. You know, Marco Rubio, go take care of Venezuela, okay? Whatever. You know, oh, you need a photo op with a random guy's wife? Fine, bring her in. I don't think he's all that engaged in that. And I think that's a really big mistake, because Pompeo is one of the architects of the disaster in Iraq, and now he's at even a higher position of power. And Pompeo and Trump are a threat to Trump. Pompeo and Bolton are a threat to Trump, right? Both of them are a threat to the president. And you better be very careful.
Alexander, if Trump releases those FISA docs, what are you expecting those documents to show?
I expect that they will prove conclusively that what we have been saying on our programs for well over a year now is true, and that those FISA warrants were based almost entirely on Christopher Steele's utterly fake, ludicrous, nonsensical dossier. In other words, on opposition, so-called research paid for by Hillary Clinton and the DNC and funneled through Glenn Simpson and Bruce Orr and his wife to the Justice Department and the FBI. I also expect that those FISA warrants will open up the whole subject of what the CIA was up to, because it's quite clear that the CIA was also involved in this process.
No, Brennan was
many.
He was running it. Brennan was running it. Okay, exactly. And we already know. If you pay attention, Bruce Orr he had warned the DOJ that this dossier. Well, you know, my wife was working there, and he warned them. Yes. And they continued to use it in front of a FISA court. That's called defrauding the court. We already know that. He has already admitted it. That's why I said in my previous answer, William Barr knows these things.
Exactly.
And I think he's going to start connecting the dots. All right?
Very much.
And I think that's why Brennan wants to keep a public profile, because if the Justice Department starts moving against him, you know, he wants to be in public because he say, I'm being persecuted by Trump. That's his strategy, to stay in the public eye as cover.
Indeed.
Because he knows it's coming down the pike. I mean, for all of them, Sally Yates, Ben Rhodes, Samantha Power. You know, what about all of the unmasking, the leaks? I mean, we're going to go through it all over again. I mean, Lindsey Graham wants a special prosecutor. I think William Barr can do it.
I think so. Can I just add something, which is, of course, that the Steele dossier is supposed to be foreign intelligence. So the CIA, which is to say Brennan, must have signed off on it. Now, back in August 2016, before the election, we know because there was a big article, a very carefully sourced article, in the Washington Post, which explained it. We know that the CIA sent information to the president being Barack Obama, which said that they had intelligence information that Vladimir Putin had himself signed off on this whole Russiagate thing. The only evidence that has come to light that says that is Steele's dossier. That fake dossier, which discussed many, many times. So the CIA must have been involved in this, and that must have been the evidence they gave to Obama in August 2016. So we see both the CIA and the FBI heavily involved in this thing, working to get Hillary Clinton elected, working to first derail and then delegitimize Donald Trump from first getting elected and then consolidating his position in the presidency, and in effect interfering in the political struggle, the democratic, constitutional, political struggle of the United States, which is by any means, by any description, deeply troubling and almost certainly illegal.
And then let's not forget their hero, John McCain, that was peddling that dossier, all right?
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. I mean, we now know how much more heavily involved John McCain was in all of that than, well, many of us suspected it, but now, of course, we know. And that's why we need to join up all the dots.
The interesting thing for me is that what we've said here, we've been saying for a long time, and it's part of the public record, okay? Public record. The interesting thing now will be, will Rachel Maddow, will CNN report on these things, or will they bury it? Or they'll just say that this is Trump's conspiracy theory against the intelligence community, Trump's conspiracy theory against the people. I mean, it's going to be very interesting how they handle it, because Jeff Zucker, patted himself on the back saying, we're not investigators. That was really, that's going to go down in history for journalism. I mean, then what the hell are you? Okay. You're stenographers, okay? But they won't be the stenographers for the DOJ now. They won't be, because they'll be giving the true narrative, not this this hoax that's been peddled for 3 years. So the second shoe has to drop. It has to drop, or it's going to happen to another president.
Right. The cynicism on the chat. Yeah, Alexander, go ahead.
Very quickly, I predict that they will report it, and they will furiously oppose it. They will damn any attempt to oppose special counsel as Donald Trump persecuting the Democrats, the intelligence services, and trying to censor the media. We're going to see a furious media campaign if that happens. That's what should happen.
But that's why I think it's going to stay within the realm of William Barr. I think that's going to be the water he's going to have to carry. And Trump should be wary of Twitter, because he will look like that, and that's how they'll portray him.
Yeah, guys, the cynicism in the chat is, I'm reading it, and people are like, no one's going to go down for this. No one's going to.
I don't know. I don't know.
Some people are saying we should look at the corrupt judicial system in the U.S. There's a lot of upper-level players like Brennan and Clapper and all these guys. Obviously, Hillary, Loretta Lynch, and all these guys who, most likely nothing's going to come down on them.
I agree. I mean, as painful it is for me to say that, but I do believe if Barr does his job, because we have the information already, like I've said earlier, connecting it together here. We know people. Look, when Roger Stone goes to trial for lying, okay, process crime. I mean, what about Brennan and Clapper? They lied. McCabe lied. So are they, where is the equal sense of justice here? And it's going to be really hard to avoid that, because that's common sense. That's not partisan. That's not partisan at all. It's just common sense. So let's hope that there will be movement on this. I know that the powers that be and their friends in the media, they constantly are trying to dupe everyone and control the narrative. Okay, it's hold the course. Let's see where this goes. Don't give up hope in the beginning. Okay,
No.
give up hope at the end.
Yeah, I should say, I think the cynicism that many of our viewers have is entirely merited and based on experience. I agree with what Peter says about Barr. I'm going to add something else, which is, of course, that the thing about Donald Trump is that he revels in fire and fury and storm. And, of course, the way to trigger a fire, fury, and storm is to get special counsel appointed to investigate this thing. I can very easily see how he could exploit all of that in his political interests. And that may be one reason why it happens. But, it's hope, because like Peter, I think these things should be investigated. In fact, I passionately believe they should be investigated because of the extraordinary wrongdoing that has been done. But like Peter and like our viewers, I'm far from certain that they will be. But let's keep our hopes up. I mean, let's not give up now.
This was an attempted coup.
Exactly.
I mean, my God. It never happened ever in the history of the United States. I mean, it's what the United States does to everybody else, but that happened. I remember saying this in December of 2016 on Crosstalk. I said they're taking the regime change playbook and importing it home, and I was right. I was right then. Absolutely. For God's sake, we've been right all along. Yes. I'm very, very proud of that, but I'm not going to take a victory lap because it's not done. We're not done.
All right. This is a good comment from Mark Volt. As bright and educated as the Duran speakers are, they understand exactly nothing about fascist American politics or Trump's ability to change it. The other shoe drops with a dull thud. And Peter, and the question from Pam. Peter, what do you think of the DCCC going after any vendor or consultant against incumbents? Yeah. We will never get rid of Pelosi, Feinstein, or leadership should be voted out.
Isn't it extraordinary? I mean, that's extortion. That's extortion in broad daylight, all right? I mean, anyone, any company that helps, I mean, that's what you do. Political consultants, they work on both sides of the aisle. They work for candidates they like and dislike or indifferent to. That's what their job is, all right? That's what they're living. And they get hired by people that believe that they can work well for them and create a success, election. But, what Pelosi's doing is that's just Tony Soprano. Tony Soprano is the Speaker of the House right now. That's a racket. It's called racketeering and extortion. And so it shows where these people really are, all right? The status quo, the golden status quo, because it's worked for them. It's worked really well for them, and they don't want it to change. And what Nancy Pelosi is, again, I'm not putting my partisan, I'm taking my partisan hat off, is that Nancy Pelosi is terrified of the AOCs, okay? Because the AOCs of this world is as much as I disagree with her, I understand why people like her. I understand why she says the things she does, because the Democratic Party is not working for the people. A good part of the Republican Party isn't either, by the way. And we see this pressure, and it's boiling. And Nancy Pelosi is basically saying, no, we're going to keep it the way it is until I'm done. Okay, and then she'll retire to her mansion with her walls and security and dogs and all of that. It's I think she is one of the richest persons in Congress. Okay, and so the status quo works really well for her. So Nancy Pelosi just shows just how thuggish her leadership is, how thuggish it is, and it's completely devoid of policy. It's basically how do we maintain power, and not allowing these outside vendors to be involved in anyone that's being primaried shows her absolute contempt for the democratic process.
All right. And while we're speaking about the democratic process, Alexander, I'm going to throw one at you from the Netherlands, from Jay Van Hogen. And I saw it in the chat, and I think it's an interesting story that not many people are covering. I would love to hear your thoughts on on last week's stunning election victory of Forum for Democracy in the Netherlands, the new Conservative Party led by the young politician Thierry Baudet. What do you think of what happened in the Netherlands?
Well, I think it is, in fact, democracy. I think this is what Peter and many people are talking about, that here we see an increasing expression of grassroots opinion in countries like the Netherlands, a country, by the way, that I know very well. I often used to travel there and like very much. I mean, Amsterdam and The Hague and Rotterdam and all these places I used to know extremely well. And I mean, I know how articulate and educated and tolerant and in the true sense liberal people in this country are. And I think that they are extremely dissatisfied with a political system which invariably seems to produce people like Rutte, who is the Prime Minister of the Netherlands and has been for a long, long time now, and which seems to me to be stuck in stone and doesn't consider people's concerns and legitimate concerns about issues like immigration, about issues like cultural change, about the way in which the Netherlands, which had a very social democratic culture before, has been forced to adapt itself to the neoliberal order that has come out of Brussels and Frankfurt and wherever. And yes, I think this is democracy. I think it is welcome. And I expect that in the Netherlands, which let's also remember, they had a referendum a few years ago in which they voted against Ukraine joining the European Union and all those things. Was it the association agreement?
Association agreement. Yeah, but the government ignored it. The government ignored it, though.
Yes. But what we are seeing with people voting in the way that they are voting is that, as in Britain, they are trying to take power back from the elite that is governing their lives. And it's not fully organized yet. It's not yet proper leaders have not yet perhaps emerged. Maybe they have to some extent in the Netherlands. And I was talking about Farage in Britain. We're at an early stage in this process, but I think it is a fully welcome and very good thing.
I think one of the interesting things, too, is that, I agree. I've been to the Netherlands a number of times, and being a student of European history, it's a wonderful place to visit. But I think it's interesting if you look at what we would say, this kind of how would you kind of a mixture of capitalism and socialism. I mean, they had they did have a very comfortable welfare state.
Yes.
But with all of the changes going on, and changes that the average person finds unsettling, I think a lot more and more people are saying, or red pilling right now, saying, well, what we had was okay and I accepted it, but now it's going way too far and I am not part of the process in deciding it. And I think it's wakening people up, to saying, the Netherlands, it's a wonderful country and it has a wonderful history and culture, and it's leaving us. It's like sand in our hands. It's going away. And at some point you go, I'm all for this and I'm all for that, and I think I'm a pretty good, tolerant person, but hold on, what about me? What about me? And I think that's where this tipping point, it's all over Europe right now. It's what people are saying, okay? The yellow vests, I think, are a perfect example of it. This is the interior of France. I mean, we always see the major cities, but really this movement came from the interior, the flyover provinces, okay? Again, the metaphor from the United States. And it's happening all over Europe. And people are saying, stop. We need to be part of this process because people don't feel like they're part of it anymore.
All right. From Gloria, Peter, you're on fire today. Way to go.
It's the questions.
Okay,
it's just the question.
And Alexander from Gobawala, can you comment on the North Korea and the North Korea embassy in Spain thing? What's going on?
I think that is one of the most. Actually, I'm very glad somebody's brought that up, because we might even do a program about this, because it seems to me this is a huge red line which has been crossed, because I think it's becoming increasingly clear that this was a CIA-sponsored operation. The Spanish judicial authorities seems to think so. So, I mean, that's not a conspiracy theory. This so-called opposition group, this North Korean opposition group, I mean, nobody's ever heard of it before.
Yeah.
I don't believe in it. So it looks as if the CIA invaded a foreign embassy in a third country, beat up the staff, removed important documents and computer data, stole it, in other words, and violated openly and brazenly the territorial sovereignty of another country, a nuclear power with which the United States is supposed to be engaged in negotiations. This is an extraordinary step. It shows how under Bolton and Pompeo, and by the way, I agree with everything, absolutely everything Peter said about those two gentlemen and about the disastrous effects they could have on Donald Trump's re-election prospects. But I think what we're seeing with Bolton and Pompeo is that rules for them, international rules, the most basic international rules, have absolutely no meaning. Everybody who has worked in international diplomacy knows that diplomatic buildings are sacrosanct. Diplomats are sacrosanct. They're not supposed to be touched. When in 1980, the US embassy in Tehran was invaded, and US diplomats there were manhandled and badly treated and treated as hostages. I mean, I thought that was appalling then.
It was appalling.
And it was appalling, and I said so. And now that I see the United States, the supposed pillar of the international order, doing exactly the same thing, because I've no doubt it was the US that was involved in this thing. As I said, the Spanish who are investigating it seem to think so. And who am I to think differently? That the United States should be involved in all this, I think, is terrible, and is the crossing of another line, a red line, and a very, very dangerous step forward. One wonders who is next. Which embassy around the world is next? Will it be the Russian embassy somewhere? Will it be the Chinese embassy somewhere else? Will it be the Venezuelan embassies? Almost certainly before long. We will see.
Yeah, but it looks like, I mean, obviously on its face, I do believe the CIA was involved. So is this the CIA is again running rogue operations? And this was at the time when the summit was happening in South Vietnam. I mean, this obviously could have been an attempt to derail Trump's diplomatic mission. It wasn't very diplomatic in the end because he listened to the wrong guy again. All right. Yes. I mean, we do know that it's come out since that Trump gave complete ultimatums. I mean, absolute ultimatums, like sign this piece of paper and surrender right now. And we know who gave him that advice. So he allowed his own national security advisor to torpedo his own summit that he had put so much effort into. I mean, again, the common sense of Donald Trump when it comes to listening people, I'm just at a complete loss. It was his diplomatic triumph to earn, to make. It was there.
Yes.
And if he'd gone away, I mean, common sense people in the foreign policy world, not the Atlantic Council nuts, but if he say, look, we got a roadmap. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of time, but I'm committed to this roadmap. And he could have come out a winner. He could have come out a winner, but no. This is this Boltonite view of the world. Everything now. Shut up. Do it, or we'll crush you. That's diplomacy in the era of Trump, unfortunately.
It's that damn HR problem. That's what it is.
Well, it is HR, but of course one has to always put responsibility
right
with where it lies.
Where it lies.
Donald Trump is the president of the United States. The buck ultimately stops with him. And can I just add to what Peter was saying, which is, of course, that North Korea is an Asian country. One knows how much questions of honor and appearances matter in those kind of societies. For Donald Trump to come along, present Kim Jong-un with a whole series of ultimatums like that, at the same time that Kim Jong-un's embassy in Madrid is being ransacked. I mean, it's not just bad, it's beyond awful. I mean, Kim Jong-un would have been forced to take a hard line, the hardest possible line. And already the North Koreans apparently are going away and are saying to themselves, is there any point in continuing with this process? Because it looks as if the US is out to humiliate us. And that is the one thing that we will never tolerate. So as Peter correctly says, an opportunity for peace is being placed in jeopardy. And we're once again talking about possible arms race, and even conceivably that might end up in another war. Well, I think Bolton and Pompeo and whoever authorized this in the CIA have done a terrible piece of work.
All right, we're heading to the hour. Let's get to some super chats. All right, from Michael, say something about DM25. Do you guys know what DM25 is?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
I don't know either. D lowercase I EM25. Michael, if you can say something about that in the chat, we'll try to answer that super chat. Thank you for your super chat. We'll try to answer if you can explain it a little better what that is. From Brody, what is your guys' take on Alexander Dugin's fourth political theory and Eurasianism in Russia? We get this question a lot, actually, about Dugin and Russia.
Yeah, I read it. I've read it. I mean, I found it one of those interesting books in the sense that what Dugin does, he's obviously an exceptionally clever man. I mean, that there's no question. And he's very, very erudite. I mean, he knows all about all the various political ideologies that exist in the West and the East. And he knows Marxism, and he knows fascism, and he knows socialism and all these sort of things. And he analyzes them incredibly well. I think this idea that, I mean, he obviously also, I should say, hates liberalism, which is this manifestation of neoliberalism that we see today. And I think one of the places where he goes wrong is I think he assumes that this liberalism has always been the same, and it was the same as 19th century liberalism, which it wasn't. But for me, the great problem with this book is that it didn't really offer, for me, any coherent way forward. I mean, this idea that you can sort of take little bits and bobs of fascism and National Socialism and communism and stick them all together, and you're going to come up with some, great new ideology that will defeat liberalism, which doesn't at the same time compromise democracy, because that's what he was also talking about. I mean, it didn't really come together, and he didn't offer anything that looked to me like a proper economic program or anything of that kind. And to talk about him as being a Eurasianist, I understand what people mean when they talk about this and what he says about this. But again, I think we have to be very clear. This is a very different type of thing from that confluence of Russia and China that is emerging in that huge territory, which is Eurasia. Again, Dugin is very good at the sort of grand geopolitics, but when he talks about cultural dimensions, I don't think he's very clear about them. And I have to say this, it struck me once again, and not for the first time with Dugin, as very much the work of a very brilliant academic and a thinker who thinks a lot about many things, but certainly not as a practical guide for action. And coming back to Dugin himself, it explains why he has no real influence in Russia. Peter understands this better than me. The people in Russia, the really important people, people like Putin and Lavrov and Shoigu and the general staff, the idea that they base their policies on Dugin's thoughts is just laughable. It has no connection to reality. It's just silly. Peter, do you want to add a few things? Because
I mean, he reminds me of Zizek, Yeah. I mean, it's colorful.
Clever. He's clever.
But for me, it's not coherent. And he has a political agenda. He has a great deal of animosity towards the liberal West, and that's fine, but I don't see it's very well grounded. And again, his descriptions of fascism, socialism, all these things, I mean, it's clever in good one-liners, but as a coherent whole, it's not really there for me. And I don't really take it very seriously, and almost no one here does. He's a colorful self-promoter.
Yeah.
All right, Alexander from John Huber. Why don't the Unionists leave the UK and either join the role or form their own, the Republic of Ireland, or form their own country? After all, Northern Ireland voted to remain.
Well, can I just say I was actually in Northern Ireland about 10 days ago, and I spoke to several unionists there, including a very, very articulate one. And I'm going to express an opinion about the unionists. I think that the unionists preserve loyalty to a Britain which is not loyal to them. And we have seen this. Yep. We have seen this again with Brexit. Because Theresa May's government depends for its survival on unionist votes. And what does Theresa May go off and do? She goes off to Brussels, negotiates with the EU a deal which gives to the Republic of Ireland the backstop and in effect a veto on whether or not Britain can leave the EU, and places Northern Ireland under different customs and economic arrangements that are different from those of Britain, but are identical to those of the Irish Republic of Southern Ireland. So here we see Theresa May doing all of that, not consulting with the unionists, taking their loyalty for granted, and in effect stabbing them in the back. And I got the impression when I was in Northern Ireland that more and more unionist people are coming to see this. Now, I think the option of secession is not a viable one, in the sense that I really can't see how Northern Ireland and the unionist community there can survive on its own. But Northern Ireland is very different, I have to say this, from the rest of the United Kingdom in many things. The unionist people, who I should stress, I liked. Those unionists I met, I liked them. I had a lot of sympathy for them. I think that they really need to understand or start to think that maybe they have more in common with the people they live with, who are nationalists, the nationalist community, on cultural issues, on economic questions, than they do with a Britain and an England that really doesn't care about them and isn't treating them properly. And maybe they need to start really thinking about the way forward that they must achieve with their neighbours in the Republic of Ireland and with the nationalist community that they live amongst. Now, that's not what I used to think, but it's certainly the view that I'm coming to now.
Yeah, London just doesn't want a problem with Northern Ireland. That's all. That's it. That's their list. Okay,
indeed.
As long as it's not a problem.
Exactly, and of course, it's at the same time it's doing what it can to create problems there, which is what we've seen with the backstop. And I have to say that having been to Northern Ireland, even despite speaking to unionist people, I feel that a united Ireland is now very much on the horizon.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it is going to happen, and I think it is going to happen sooner rather than later, and perhaps for the people of Northern Ireland, Protestant and Catholic, Union and Nationalist, it is a good thing. And the thing that needs to happen is for arrangements to be made so that those people, the Protestant people in Northern Ireland, feel comfortable in it and don't have their traditions and their loyalties trampled upon and dishonoured. And I think, speaking to people of both communities in Derry, where I was, I think that is probably achievable. I was very, very impressed to see how far the process of reconciliation has moved on. And if the questioner is familiar with the history of that of Northern Ireland, I will tell you that I met a member of the B Specials who is a committed unionist, the B Specials being one of the Protestant police militias that existed in the 1960s, and a former member of the IRA. And they were sitting together in the same room, and they were talking happily together about many things. And strikingly, the IRA man, the ex-IRA man, supports Brexit, and the unionist opposes it. So, and both of them said they were socialists. So there you go.
I love politics.
So there you go. But I mean, they were able to talk in a perfectly friendly way. They clearly knew each other well. There were clearly those differences between their communities and between each other, but they're able to find a way forward. And I hope that will continue. And I hope that they will not be held hostage to the increasing idiocies that we're seeing coming out of London.
All right, thank you for that super chat. And let's go now to a super chat from, let's see, 737 Tech. Have you guys talked about Russia's actions in Venezuela yet? Peter, Alexander, can you guys talk about what happened in Venezuela?
Well, I actually saw the two Alexes talk about it, and I was very, very impressed. Alexander Mercouris and I were both taken aback about the level of Russia's the commitment Russia has shown publicly to the Venezuelan government, the legitimate Venezuelan government. But in hindsight, and actually doing a little bit more research on it, I mean, Russia has so many interests in Venezuela, trade and commerce and investments. It shouldn't be surprising. And the Maduro government is very open and welcoming Russian aid. We all have to throw in, too, that China is sending humanitarian aid, which doesn't get covered in the Western media. Of course, because of what we believe, I strongly believe, is U.S. meddling in their Venezuela's infrastructure, a number of technicians probably wearing uniforms, going to look at the infrastructure, particularly the power grid, to get it back online. It was probably some very malicious malware that was injected into the power sector. So, and of course, the equipment that military equipment that Venezuela has been buying since the Chavez years, probably need an upgrade. So they're sending technicians there. The United States does that all the time with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia buys lots of arms, and U.S. technicians go there and tell them how it works. Put in upgrades and whatnot. I mean, the way the media was just, their hair was on fire. But I was watching some of the morning shows in the U.S. and they're talking about it, and it's like, how dare the Russians do that? Well, Venezuela is a sovereign country. It has the right to invite people to its country as it wishes. Again, you have this American exceptionalism demanding the United States will determine what countries have friends with other countries. This is insanity, and it never works out right. And it's absolutely arrogant. It has nothing to do with America's national interest. The Boltons and the Pompeos do it because they don't get enough pushback, and they're always celebrated in the U.S. media for doing it. Remember Brian Williams when Trump attacked Syria illegally, those beautiful missiles? Well, that's the media gives the backing to the Boltons and the Pompeos when it comes to Venezuela. So I think it's consistent with Russia's interest because it has a lot of commercial and investment interest in Venezuela. It's actually doing the right thing because the United States is illegally sanctioning Venezuela, hoping to punish the general population. It is obvious that this is the case. I refer everyone to go to the American Conservative. There's a brilliant article. I shared it on Facebook today. The word cruel was in the title, I remember. Trump administration's cruel sanctions against Venezuela, something like that. Take a look at it. I mean, it's so transparently illegal and immoral what's going on here. And Russia's pushing back. Now, how much further we'll push back, I think we have to speculate about that. But I think that, they're basically saying we're going to do everything we can to make sure the legitimate government of Maduro stays in power. But of course, there are always limits. OK, Russia doesn't go in never goes into an open-ended situation. Never. It has its priorities, and when it believes it's achieved what it's needed to achieve, it goes home. Like in Syria, there is a skeleton crew in Syria because they believe, and Trump keeps saying that, there's no more ISIS, the caliphate, well, the Russians did that, not the Americans. As a matter of fact, the Americans helped the caliphate last as long as it did.
Alexander?
Can I just say I was absolutely stunned when I saw those Russian troops there. It's the second time I've got the Russian reaction wrong. I did not expect the Russians to go into Syria in 2015 in the way that they did, and I did not expect the Russians to go into Venezuela in the way that they have just done. And to my mind, what it shows is the growth of Russian military power and political and economic self-confidence, that they now feel that they can take these kind of steps. That certainly would not have been the case 10 years ago. So I think that is in itself an important fact, and it's certainly something that we need to take into account. Now, it's quite clear to me that the Russian step was very carefully coordinated. They've undoubtedly been talking to the Venezuelans, obviously. They passed through Cuba, which shows that obviously they're working through Cuba, and I have no doubt at all that they will have consulted very closely with their great friend to the east, which is China, which has also made very clear its support for Venezuela in this situation. So here we see the Russians again coming in a small way, I think in a way that is going to be decisive. I think the Russians have the technology and the expertise and the know-how to support Venezuela deal with any malware issues that the US is playing with them. I mean, I think it's Kaspersky. Alex, you're far more knowledgeable about that sort of thing than I am. But I think the Kaspersky lab in Moscow is supposed to be the world's premier institution in dealing with antivirus software. I'm not sure whether that's right, but certainly they're a famous
one of them. So, one of them for sure.
One of them. Anyway, they undoubtedly have all the intellectual resources to do that. They also undoubtedly have the technical resources, by the way, to sort out the major problems in Venezuela's oil industry, which is in a very, very, very bad way.
Good point.
Because so, I mean, they are in a position to do a lot to Venezuela. And of course, the mere fact that they are there makes it extremely difficult for the US to take any kind of overt military steps against Venezuela, because it's quite clear from what we've seen in Syria that the US is very, very hesitant. The US military is very, very hesitant about taking on the Russians head on in any situation. I think, like Peter, it will be a measured, carefully calibrated intervention. The Russians will not want to overinvest in Venezuela. They calibrated it and measured it very carefully in Syria, and Venezuela will be the same. But I think this is a game changer.
Well, it's very important to note here is that everything Alexander Mercouris just said and what I said is correct, okay? And the need to upgrade the oil sector is very, very important, okay, because there's not been enough investment in it over the years. But one thing is very, very important, and it's the S-300s that Venezuela has. And this is a message, a very strong message. It's the same message that came out of Syria. Syria, with S-300s, has the capacity to defend itself. Venezuela, with the same technology, has the ability to protect itself. And that is a message to Pompeo and Abrams, okay, Elliot Abrams. You want to mess with us? Try, because your planes will start falling out of the sky. Now, if you look at all of the other interventions recently, Iraq, could it defend itself? No. Afghanistan? No. All right. Libya? No. And this is a clear message that if you're going to put fire in the sky, well, we can put fire in the sky too. That is a direct message. Don't be thinking your stupid thoughts that you usually do, and your reckless and careless rhetoric, because on the ground they have the resources to fight back. And when a country can fight back, that's when the U.S. starts, steps back.
All right. From Phoenix FP40 Super Chat. Guys, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, buy a t-shirt. It really helps us out. Yep, it does. Smash that like button, subscribe, and buy a t-shirt. That helps us out. And the question is, are we any nearer to an episode on Jay Peterson? Alan X. Yeah, we'll Peter, what do you say? We'll get to an episode on Jay Peterson.
Oh, I could do that in my sleep.
Absolutely, we have it in mind.
In a heartbeat. Okay, I mean, yeah.
I'll just add one thing. Yes, we should certainly do one. The problem is there's been so much going on over the last couple of weeks. Yeah. What with Mueller and what with Brexit and what with Venezuela.
It's been quite a news cycle.
It's been quite a heavy news cycle. So we just haven't had the time or the space really to do a video on it. But certainly we will get to it. And that's not to say, by the way, that it's not an important story. It is. But we will certainly turn to it soon.
All right. Thank you, Phoenix, for that super chat. And from Penguins fan, Alexander, China banning Canada canola. Does Russia got canola to sell to China?
Canola is, sorry. It's
canola.
Is this an episode of Jeopardy right now?
Yeah.
Like canola oil, I imagine. No, is that?
I presume.
Penguins fan. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a seed, isn't it?
It's a seed. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, right. I mean, this is actually a good question because if we're talking about natural resources, the country which is blessed, if that's the right word, with the greatest natural resources on earth is Russia. I saw recently that it's valued at something like $75 trillion. The natural resources in Russia. China is a country that lacks many natural resources. I mean, it's short of oil, it's had problems with food. It needs the security that comes from having a strong partner. It has it in Russia. It's discovering that when it sources these products from countries like Brazil and Canada, they're not reliable. With Russia, it can be sure that that is a reliable partner. And I'm pretty sure that whatever canola is, and I'm sorry to say I don't really know what it is, I'm sure that the Russians could provide.
Alexander, you have canola oil, but being Greek, you know that it's no comparison to the Greek olive oil, so.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, there you go. I'm sure.
Wow, we have a bit of chauvinism on the program.
No, Peter. The olive oil is the best oil is a matter of fact. But anyway, having said which, the Russians can produce any. They can produce.
If you say it, Alex, and it's gospel with me, don't worry.
So they can produce canola oil, whatever that is, sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, you name it. I mean, they can produce it. The Russians can provide it in abundance, and there's no doubt at all that they can. And Canada is going to be the loser because, of course, it needs to export its natural products, and it's finding that by this alignment, this excessive alignment that is forged with the US, persecuting executives of Huawei, behaving in the way that it has, it's now losing its access to what will soon be the biggest market in the world. So there you go. Not clever policy. But as Peter
what do you expect from that prime minister? All right.
Well, I was going to open it up to you, Peter, because on Trudeau, you are by far and away the star.
All right. Well, how about a super chat from Tweety Bird Peter? Could the Mueller report be viewed as a counter coup against the deep state? The report entrapped, exposed MSM, Clinton, Clapper, Brennan, and Hayden, also FBI. Who have violated their statutes and responsibilities.
No, as a matter of fact, I think the Mueller report is actually an attempt to contain. Because no one can convince me with all of that investigative power that they didn't really actually come across the truth. See, the Mueller report was their parameters is, did Trump and his orbit collude? That's not really a legal term, but anyway, collude with the state of Russia and officials representing Russia. It was very narrow. They got a lot of, the net caught a lot of people for other things, but that was their mission. And And they came to the conclusion that there was none because, of course, there wasn't any. However, in the process of determining that, I have to believe that Mueller found a lot of these other things floating out there, but it wasn't his mandate to connect the dots, because if he had actually been given that mandate and he was an honest man, I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard terrible things about Mueller in his past. But anyway, so if he had given a larger mandate and he had done his job as an honest investigator, he would have overturned Washington, D.C. with 380 pages or whatever it was. But that wasn't his mandate. That's why I keep saying if the second shoe drops, because and it's one of the reasons why I think Mueller will never talk about it. Because what do you think? He goes in front of Congress and one Republican says, well, what did you know about the FISA warrants? Is he going to lie? See, he doesn't want to talk about all the stuff that they came across. You know, he was looking for one needle in the haystack, and he ignored the rest of the haystack. And that's really interesting here. So I think that the premise of your question is that if he had been given a wider mandate, would have this been a real threat to the deep state? I think it would have been, and I think it still could under a different investigation.
All right, we have two super. Yeah, Alexander.
No. What I was just going to say was, when Mueller was appointed, I made the mistake of assuming that he was acting in good faith. And I thought, much as the questioner has suggested, that his job was indeed to bury Russiagate. And I thought that he would be able to do it within a few weeks, because it was so obvious to me that there was nothing there. And in fact, I have articles on the Duran which make those points. I never expected, and it turns out Donald Trump's lawyers never expected, that this would turn into a 2-year investigation, a monstrous fishing expedition, that he would go sidetracked into looking for obstruction into an investigation of a crime which never existed. So no, it was not an action that, you know, repelled a deep state coup. It was a part of a deep state coup which miscarried, and it would have gone on and on and on. I am absolutely sure of this. If a new Attorney General, William Barr, had not been appointed, who had made very clear, even before he had been appointed, of his deep skepticism about the whole enterprise.
Okay, we've got two super chats which are going exactly where I wanted the conversation to go. So the first one's from Penguins fan. Fox News analyst General Jack Keane said that Venezuela is their backyard. He said the U.S. should give more lethal aid to Ukraine. We just had the Ukraine elections. Peter, Alexander, I want you guys just jump in on this, because I had down for us to talk about the Ukraine elections and what happened. Jack Keane, you all know him on Fox News. I would classify him as a neocon as well. He says some out there stuff. And of course, we just finished talking about Venezuela, so jump on this super chat.
It really just begs the question. I mean, do these people have any learning curve? I mean, how many times do you have to do it and end with the same result? Failure or destruction and despair and poverty and blowback and terrorism. See, these people, they never experience the misery that they create. And what they do is, with the revolving door, the arms industry, they love this, another outlet for them. I mean, there's so many people that benefit from it and never feel the results. And in the foreign policy blob realm, no one in power is ever held account. I mean, even Elliot Abrams, he was caught perjuring himself, lying in front of Congress, and he gets a pardon, and he's right back in the White House. I mean, come on. So, I mean, your question, it is so disheartening that such a question has to be asked still, because it defies common sense. It defies international law. And again, it shows me in a broader, in historical epoch, is that it is because the unipolar moment is closing so fast, and the United States is lashing out.
Yeah.
I mean, Philip Giraldi had a fascinating piece that was written about a week ago. Is that he's former CIA, I mean, 20-year plus veteran. He really believes that the Venezuela sideshow in his mind is really getting ready for Iran, and he knows what he's talking about here. So we can throw Iran into the mix. We can throw Ukraine, Venezuela. This is this exceptionalism on steroids. And they think that this is their, see, they want to create, like Venezuela, they want to create a public defeat and humiliation of Russia and China. This is what, it had nothing to do with Venezuela. Eventually, it may have something to do with oil, okay? But really what they do is they want a humiliation. Ukraine, they don't care about the people of Ukraine, not one whit, okay? But they want this to put pressure on Russia, for Russia to overreact, for Russia to do something that they will then later, NATO will be justified in acting, meaning the United States. They keep pushing the envelope here. Look, signing over, Trump, for some stupid reason, signed over the Golan Heights to Israel. It's not his to give away. But see, it's showing that the taking the moves that they have impunity, that they can do what they want to do, and they do not think about the consequences. Look, like giving away, quote unquote, giving away the Golan Heights. What country in the Middle East, a friend and foe, is going to want to deal with the Trump administration? You break international law blatantly. And it shows you're not a good partner, okay? So I'll finish with this, is that when you look at like Ukraine and Venezuela, this administration wants the worse, the better. The worse, the better. And, to hell with the consequences. This is what's happening. It's absolutely reckless. Go ahead, Alexander.
Well, there's much to say. I mean, first of all, when somebody in the United States talks about Venezuela as being in the US's backyard, a number of thoughts immediately come to mind. Firstly, it's basically telling people in Venezuela, well, you don't live in an independent country. You're not entitled to make decisions for yourself in your interest, because it's the United States that ultimately decides, because you're part of the United States' backyard. That's one thing. But the other thing is, of course, the United States goes all around the world telling other people, you don't have any right to have a backyard. If you're China, you don't have a right to have a backyard or even a neighborhood in the South China Sea. It's entirely legitimate for the United States to operate its fleets there, encroach on your Chinese seas around you, apparently occupy an island, as has apparently just happened. If you're talking about Russia, it's entirely legitimate for the United States to encroach in Georgia, to involve itself in Ukraine, to bring the Baltic states into NATO, to break promises not to expand NATO eastwards. Russia and China, to the US mind, they have no backyard. Spheres of influence are wrong. But the United States, in their mind, is different. It's exceptional. It is entitled to its backyard. It is entitled to a sphere of influence. It has a right to defend it. Now, when people in Moscow and Beijing and around the world see all of that, they must say to themselves, this is a United States where no rules apply, because they apply rules on us, which they do not apply to themselves. And we simply cannot work with these people. And what they say and what they mean is different, and their entire foreign policy is driven by hypocrisy and is insincere. And that, it seems to me, is unquestionably the truth. Now, that's one thing. Now, the other thing, which is all about sending arms to Ukraine, well, we've just had elections in Ukraine, and what a disastrous folly that US policy in Ukraine has turned out to be. Because the president of Ukraine, Poroshenko, who was the president who has pursued this policy of extreme alignment with the West, who is the friend of the United States, who came to power in Ukraine following a violent coup in which the democratic and constitutionally elected president of Ukraine was overthrown, and who has tried to embed Ukraine in NATO and the EU to the point of even making membership, the prospect of membership in the NATO and the EU, a part of Ukraine's constitution. That president, in a presidential election, managed to get only 17% of the vote of those who voted.
Of those who voted.
Of those who voted. 3 million Ukrainians in Russia were prevented from voting, and the voting turnout in Ukraine itself was 63%, meaning that that president has had the support of just 10% or even less of the total Ukrainian electorate, and who is now looking increasingly likely to take over from him a new leader, Zelensky, one expects, who has already said that he wants to open direct negotiations with Russia, and who just announced shortly before we started our program that he is not committed in the same degree to NATO and EU membership, and wants to put the whole idea to a referendum before such a step ever takes place. So already he is withdrawing, climbing back from the extreme positions Poroshenko, encouraged by the United States, has taken. So US policy in Ukraine has proved to be deeply unpopular with the Ukrainian people. The supply of arms to Ukraine has simply highlighted the conflict and violence it has caused in that region. It is all about extending the US sphere of influence closer and closer to the heartland of Russia, against promises that the US has made, and with this reference to Venezuela as being part of the US's backyard, we now have the admission that the United States does have spheres of influence, even though it denies them to everyone else.
You know, well, just think of it, you guys. What if the Chinese president, Xi, he came out and said, well, we have the Xi doctrine now, and this is our sphere of influence, just like the Monroe doctrine. I mean, if the United States wants to play with that rhetoric, why don't the Chinese? Chinese don't have to say yes. They can say no. That's their power right now. Yeah. Okay, also, just to give me a couple comments on the election. Zelensky in Ukraine, he's a comedian, quite popular. I'm not holding against him, well, not at all.
No.
But it's interesting is that he went to the south part of Ukraine, where it's primarily Russian speakers, and he spoke to them in Russian. And that appealed to people. And when he was in Western Ukraine, talked in Ukrainian. That's their language, okay? My point is here is that he recognizes Ukraine for what it is, okay? NATO membership, EU membership is not going to fix Ukraine. The only thing that can fix Ukraine are the people themselves. And he ran on one platform point. One, anti-corruption. That's what he ran on. Other than that, he was hardly committed on anything. And that spoke to people. It spoke to a lot of young people, Russian speakers and Ukrainian speakers. So, I mean, who would have thought, you know, a comedian, I actually watched some of his stuff. He's kind of funny. He's light, okay? It's what people like. And Poroshenko has not solved Ukraine's problems. As a matter of fact, in many respects, it's gotten worse. So we will see if the Zelensky guy will become part of, you know, elite capture, which is always the U.S. strategy. We'll see where it goes. But and we you know, we still have what is it, the 23rd of April, 28th of April for the second runoff. We'll see if there's what kind of machinations and shenanigans will be between now and then. I'm putting money on it.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see what Poroshenko has up his sleeve. American Rebel, thank you, gentlemen, for your additional streams and for keeping us informed. Thank you for your super chat, American Rebel. We will try to do more live streams. We're glad that you like them. And from Katie Miggs, this is a good question. I wanted to talk about this as well. Alexander, we have a video on this coming up. Who is behind the collapse of the Turkish lira? And is it related to Venezuela?
Well, right.
One happened before the other.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
I know. I was going to say there is a confluence of things. Firstly, and we have done a video of this. I mean, firstly, one has to say that President Erdogan's very unorthodox economic policies are coming back to bite him. I mean, he has not run the Turkish economy in a prudent way. I mean, he's basically run it on the basis of very heavy borrowing, and that has exposed Turkey to deep vulnerabilities at a time when the world economy is slowing. Having said that, and we discussed this on our program, with Turkey under Erdogan taking an increasingly independent line from the US, one cannot discount the probability that there has been some degree of, shall we say, economic manipulation there. I mean, at the very least, it will have deterred investment from pro-US sources, from Europe and from the United States and elsewhere. But I suspect beyond that, people are probably extremely nervous about the whole direction of Turkish policy and the way in which it is drifting away from the United States, and with the United States constantly using sanctions now. I think that will have played a big role in increasing the destabilization of Turkey. So it's a big subject. We've done a video on it. I think that if you put aside Venezuela and talk instead about this increasingly independent and assertive foreign policy that Erdogan is following on Venezuela, on Syria, on relations with Iran, on many things, on buying S-400 missiles from Russia, on building the Turk Stream pipeline. All of that, I think, is playing a role in all of this. The general slowdown in the world economy is also playing a role, and President Erdogan's unorthodox economic policies, I'm sorry to say, have played a role also.
Peter from Reckless Abandon said that Denmark has blocked Nord Stream 2 for environmental reasons. And we have a super chat from Penguins fan as well, who says an update on Nord Stream 2. What do you make of Denmark taking this action? Germany's
I don't think
going to be
really,
pissed.
I don't think it's really going to go anywhere. I mean, the Germans want this pipeline, and they're going to get it. Okay, they're going to get it. And I think what they're going to, the latest wrinkle that I came across is that Germany is invoking its 12 nautical mile rights from its land border into the sea, and they will be completely in charge of the last 12 miles. So anyone that wants to mess with that is messing with Berlin, not with the Russians. Okay, that is a kind of a backstop, if it were, for the Nord Stream. Now the Germans are determined this is going to go through, and it's going to go through. Absolutely. The U.S. has failed on this completely. If Germany wants something like that, they're going to get it. And other countries can invoke things. I don't think it's going to be really an impediment. I mean, I think it's almost done. So there's nothing that's going to turn it back. And it's going to be, this is one thing that the Germans are going to learn, is that if they're not going to look after their national interests, no one else is going to do it. And it's a real wake-up call. It really is a wake-up call. I mean, the Europeans have been very complacent and taken advantage in many ways of American largesse in the past. But now they're beginning to realize that they have to pay a very high price for that, quote unquote, protect. It's again Tony Soprano. I'm here to protect you, and you have to cough up, okay? It's patently becoming obvious. It's a racket, and so if you don't have control of your energy sovereignty, you're in really deep danger, and they know that here. Mm-hmm. And it's a very good. See, the thing is that if you go back, this debate actually was going on during the Soviet era. Alexander Mercouris will remember in the 1980s, because they were very worried that they'd be over-reliant on Soviet natural gas. And the counter argument has always been, well, in those days, it's a huge hard currency earner for the Soviet Union, and they needed hard currency, desperately needed it. I mean, in the 1970s, they were paying for grain in gold. they were using their gold reserves to buy food. And so now, I mean, this is a very important sector of the economy. Why would Russia want to fiddle with that? If you look at all of the, and I remember it was the early days of RT. On 2 years in a row, we were up on New Year's Eve because they had the gas spat with Ukraine, and I until I was blue in the face, I said the Russians just want to be paid. That's all they want. They want to be paid for their services and their product. And the Germans see it the same way. I mean, this is a very good, lucrative deal for everybody involved. I mean, and the Americans want to butt in, and they want to control the energy sector to, number one, punish the Russians, and number two, make the Europeans pay higher energy prices. It's all one-sided and for one party.
I agree with everything that Peter has said. I would add my own view, which is that this thing with the Danes is just a wrinkle. There's lots of sniping going on about Nord Stream 2. It's just a wrinkle. It might delay it by a few weeks, not more than that. And Peter's absolutely right that for the Russians, getting paid for their gas is what they've always been about. They have never used, despite what people say, they have never used gas sales to try and buy political influence in Europe. That's not going to happen. But for the Germans also, Russia is a very reliable gas supplier. They want Nord Stream 2 because they have learned to their cost that they cannot rely on the political reliability of the transit states, first and foremost on Ukraine. In those two gas wars that Peter was referring to, Ukraine stole gas that was destined for European customers. The Germans know it. They've never forgotten it. They will never let themselves be put in that position again. And that's why we've had Nord Stream 1, and now we're getting Nord Stream 2, and why the Germans are busy forging their connection to Russia. And a little trouble from Denmark is not going to stand in their way.
And and all of this here, again, when we look at the South Stream, we look at Nord Stream and all that, no one in the media, and even at the ridiculous think tanks like the Atlantic Council, they never explain why Russia and Germany, why Russia and Turkey and other countries are involved in pipeline deals with Russia. Why? Because Ukraine is an unreliable transit partner. I mean, the part of the pipeline that goes in, it was Soviet built. The pipeline in Ukraine has been so damaged by siphoning. Yeah. I mean, you literally would have trucks just go up to the pipeline and stick in a tube and start sucking it out. I mean, and the different control areas, because they monitor, they see, well, why is the pressure going down here? It's because they're siphoning it off. And that's why they need new pipelines, because the Ukrainians never kept them up to standard. All they did was pilfer, and pilfer. And so the pipelines, they took a very important asset and they destroyed it. And Russia said, we're not going to deal with people that are going to destroy this asset that we're dependent on and our customers are dependent on. So we're going to go around you and under you. And that's exactly what they did. It's all common sense. It has nothing to do with energy as a political weapon. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. The U.S. is using energy as a political weapon.
Indeed. Okay. Indeed. In fact, can I just add very quickly something to what Peter said, which is, of course, if we go back in time to before 2006, I mean, one of the proposals that was made, what the Russians were actually trying to achieve then, before they were looking at these other pipelines, was that they wanted to enter into arrangements with the Ukrainians whereby the Russians would themselves be involved in managing the pipeline networks through Ukraine, because they saw that pipeline network as a vital interest for Russia itself, the proper functioning of that pipeline. The Ukrainians absolutely refused. They siphoned Russian gas through Nord Stream and Turkey. It's predictable, it's happened, and as I said, sniping from the Danes, intrigues by the US are not going to stop it.
Okay, Penguins fan, super chat, Alexander, an update on Idlib, Syria, and what will happen between Turkey and the SDF.
I have to say, I haven't actually been watching much news in Idlib recently.
I don't think anything's really changed since we last talked about it. Okay?
No, I don't think so. Because to be honest, as I said, what with Brexit and Mueller, I haven't really had much time for anything else. But as I said, I stick with what I've said previously. I think that especially with Erdogan now coming under increasing pressure in Turkey, and therefore becoming economically even more dependent on the Russians than he has been up to now, I think that I stick to my prediction that come the summer, we will see the Idlib situation completely resolved. And with Kurdistan, it's the same. At the moment, actually, the primary interest, the primary focus of the Russians is not Idlib and it's not Kurdistan. It's this US base in another part of Syria, Al-Tanf, near the Jordanian border. And the Russians have been putting very, very heavy pressure on the US, either to withdraw from that base or to relax from it, because I think they see it as a threat to serious control of that territory in the south and east of Syria, and I think they strongly object to the presence of the US troops there. But I come back to what I said. I think that we will see a Syrian offensive or a Syrian reoccupation of Idlib. I know that Russian and Turkish joint patrols in Idlib have already started to happen. I'm not fully up to speed with the very latest news. Like Peter, I doubt that anything very dramatic has happened. You have our promise that as soon as anything does, we will cover it.
But it's but there's a nuance here. We haven't heard a lot about it because it isn't publicized. Slowly but surely and confidently, without all the fanfare, without showing people maps. Silly doing that. Okay, what the American presence there is basically a big middle finger. Is that we're not going to let you recontrol your country. We're not going to give you back your sovereignty. And we're not going to give it back to you because we have the power to do it. So suck it up. That's exactly what it is. There is no strategic value whatsoever to still be in Syria. The Russians destroyed the caliphate. The U.S. is not invited there. They should leave. They are there illegally under international law. No one wants them there except for the Israelis. Maybe that's why they're there.
Okay, from Legion Trooper, Super Chat Peter, Trump is letting the neocons run wild. This is not the guy I voted for. Tulsi has become the real anti-war candidate. Real quick, Peter, is Tulsi the real anti-war candidate? Is she the real deal?
In many ways, yes. I mean, her Hindu nationalism thing is something I don't like, okay? And she kind of caved on Israel, which I didn't like. The pressure in high politics to kowtow is so overwhelming because she doesn't want to be deplatformed for the primary. So that's her goal. Her goal is to get into the primaries. Mark my words, I've said it before. They're going after her. They want to make sure she can't get on that podium because she's going to say things that are forbidden and people are going to like it because Trump did that. Trump did it in 2016. He said the things that the establishment abhor. And like Alex, Christoforou, we made that short video about the 34-page manual that the ex-CIA guys say. I mean, that's it. Yeah. I mean, this is targeted at her.
Check out that video that we did. I think we did it.
Good video.
Yeah, we did it about like 2-3 days ago. Yeah, check out that video where we highlight a lot of your points. Legion Trooper.
And that pamphlet was written keeping Trump in mind and making sure it never happens again. That means her.
The briefing book. Yeah. Exactly. Alexander from Enrico, Super Chat. Oligarch Kolomoisky owns Zelensky. How can you seriously believe that he is a moderate?
No, I don't say that. I mean, I should say Zelensky is not somebody I think anybody knows very much about. And I've certainly not called him a moderate, and I've certainly not called Kolomoisky a moderate. I mean, and the extent to which Zelensky and Kolomoisky are involved with each other, obviously Poroshenko claims that, and it's been widely discussed and talked about. I should say that Zelensky himself, as I understand it, denies that he is involved with Kolomoisky.
And Kolomoisky denies it too.
Exactly.
But in our video, Alexander, but in our video, you did mention, I believe you mentioned that Kolomoisky, or maybe before our video, that Kolomoisky does business is hurting. He does want to,
exactly.
get business moving with Russia.
That's the next point.
Yeah.
That's the next point I wanted to make. Kolomoisky is a completely cynical, corrupt oligarch. I can remember Vladimir Putin giving an interview in which he discussed Kolomoisky and used language about him, which it is extremely rare for Vladimir Putin to use. I mean, he's not somebody who goes in for that sort of language. I mean, it was almost on the brink of using unprintable words. Kolomoisky is a terrible man. He is also someone who is very, very focused on making himself as rich as possible and on keeping his businesses going. His major power center is the city which I insist on calling Dnipropetrovsk, but which, of course, Poroshenko tells us we should call Dnipro. Dnipropetrovsk is in the eastern part of Ukraine. Half of it is Russian-speaking. It is heavily industrial. It has historically been very, very tied in to Russia and to the Russian economy. Kolomoisky, despite all the things he is, probably understands better than some other people in Ukraine do that Ukraine's interests require some sort of economic rapprochement with Russia. And it is in his own interests that that should happen. Now, obviously, that doesn't make him a good person. Obviously, that doesn't mean that he is not an oligarch. But it does mean that his interests point in a certain direction. Now, to the extent that he has influence over Zelensky, which he probably does, that will be interests that he will be promoting through Zelensky to the extent that he can. I would add that another oligarch, who we used to hear an awful lot more about, who is Rinat Akhmetov, who was the big Eastern oligarch, the one based in Donetsk. He, in this election, has backed Poroshenko, despite being, by some people, considered pro-Russian. And the reason Akhmetov backs Poroshenko is because his economic interests are completely different. He wants to regain control of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics because he wants to regain control of the factories and mines and assets which he used to own there, and which the authorities of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics have nationalized. So that's why he backs Poroshenko from economic interests, and that's why Kolomoisky might want a rapprochement of a certain sort with Russia for economic interests.
It's really
these people. It's money, and that's
exactly. Akhmetov. It's really interesting. Akhmetov. He was one of the forces behind having Yanukovych sign the association agreement. Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. These people are only interested in their assets and their wealth. These oligarchs, they actually wanted the European association agreement. They wanted to be able to break their businesses into Europe to clean their money. Okay, for them, it was an economic opportunity. And then it turned into, Ukraine's turned to the West and anti-Russia and all that. But these oligarchs, all they wanted to do was pursue their own personal financial interests. And see what the law of unintended consequences created? It's extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Super chat from John Huber, Peter Alexander. It's April 1st, remember that.
Yeah.
Apparently, Barr lied. Collusionists have been vindicated. This was on Zero Hedge. It's an article via Caitlin Johnson. Well, if it's true, then I guess Peter, if it's not April 1st, Peter Alexander, I guess Putin was behind the whole thing. Incredible.
But this is how things collapse. If you look at every major civilization and culture, it collapses because it doesn't believe in any kind of truth about itself. And so, and this is what's happening right now. When you look at reality and you say it's not true and you deny its authenticity, and this is where we are right now.
Caitlin Johnson is calling it out. She's calling it out.
Okay, well, I've read a lot of her stuff here. She's very invested in all of this here, but it's one of these. I look at her as kind of like Jimmy Dore. Not that I'm comparing the two, but I mean, Jimmy Dore, if you hit the right topics, we could be, beer buddies, and we'd sit on a bar stool and have a great old time. But then if you bring up the issue of abortion and immigration, multiculturalism, we wouldn't be talking for long, okay? And with this Caitlin woman, I mean, I agree with her on so many things, but when we leave the reservation of Russiagate, then I have to say, I'm not with you so much on that, okay? So, she's very vested in it. She's very passionate about it, and she's written some good stuff about it too. All right. So I haven't read the Zero Hedge article. I will do that this evening, and I'd be more than happy to comment it later on the week or next week.
I'm sure it's an April Fool's.
I mean, I saw some really bad April Fool's ones on Facebook, and I was not. We live in an era when nothing's funny anymore. I mean, humor's died. Beauty has died. Aesthetics has died. Truth has died. There's nothing left. They've whittled it away. They've just destroyed everything. And everyone is miserable as a result.
And I'm sure, Alexander, you've talked about Barr often. I'm sure Barr would never, ever make any kind of mistake. I mean, I've heard this guy dots every I and crosses every T. He is absolutely meticulous when he writes a summary or he passes any sort of judgment.
I think to suggest otherwise is a crazy conspiracy theory. I mean, that Barr would deliberately misrepresent Mueller when he knows perfectly well that Mueller's report is going to be released and that Mueller is there to contradict him at any time is crackers. And I have to also say, I mean, I know a lot of people are very critical of some of the things that Barr did during the time of the Iran-Contra affair, I believe, and during the George W. Bush administration. It doesn't alter the fact that he is a meticulous jurist. He would not deceive anybody on a document of this kind. That is an absurd idea. And of course, Barr also quotes Mueller's words, which are completely self-explanatory and straightforward on the subject of collusion. I just want to say something about Caitlin Johnson. Caitlin Johnson is very passionate. She has, as Peter says, invested heavily in herself on this Russiagate thing. She's left-wing and has come under ferocious attack by all sorts of people. I have seen some of the things that have been said about her. I think some of the things were just awful that have been said about her. I understand completely why sometimes she goes a little bit too far, as in the kind of April Fool joke that we have seen. Overall, I think her reporting of this thing has been absolutely outstanding.
Yes,
and marked with great courage, given, as I said, the sort of place, the position she comes from, and the attacks that have been leveled against her.
Right. So
what I like about her is that she's very methodical. Right. Okay. Yes. Unlike the rest of the media, she says, okay, now let's look at the timeline. Let's look at the chronology. This is what we know. This is what's in the public realm. And she's very meticulous about that. But her passion sometimes it competes with her logic. I would say that. And I don't say that in a disparaging way. 5 more minutes, guys.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing. Let's get to these last super chats and wrap it up. But thank you, John. We'll definitely check it out on Zero Hedge. I think everyone here knows that we do enjoy Zero Hedge. We find that a great source of news. So we'll check out that article by Caitlin Johnson. Super chat from Tweety Bird. Alexander, is Turkey's debt a threat to huge banks who hold that debt? We did a video on this. It'll go up very, very soon, probably by tomorrow. But Alexander, you want to comment on this?
It is. And of course, as we discussed in this video, this is coming at a time when the entire Eurozone is now drifting into recession. The latest economic news from Germany has been terrible. Very bad, with German industry now apparently definitely contracting, and Germany probably, quite possibly in recession, and of course Italy probably is in recession, France is drifting that way. The Eurozone, the European banks, and the EU absolutely does not need a financial crisis in Turkey. It could very easily spill over into the Eurozone banking system, which has never had its problems sorted out. Most Italian banks are known to be insolvent, and Europe is littered with the problems of so-called zombie banks, banks that are not really viable and are functioning on sort of life support. So to answer the question, if there is a financial crisis in Turkey and a default there, which is not impossible, in fact, it's quite likely. I mean, the state of Turkey's reserves is now very, very dangerous. If there is a financial crisis in Turkey, it will be very bad news for the Eurozone, for the European financial system, and for Europe's banks.
Okay, Peter from Penguins Fan, a super chat. The Russian liberals like Julia Masha-Gessen still praise Yeltsin. What am I missing? Haven't they learned anything from the 90s?
No, they've learned nothing from the 1990s at all. They still believe in this caricature of the West, where they have real democracy. Well, ask Bernie Sanders about democracy, okay? Oh, talk to Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Maybe she should talk to Masha Gessen about how democracy works, all right? This whole Russiagate thing was to subvert democracy. So the Russian liberals are a very weird breed of people. I mean, they're just impenetrable. I mean, you can't use logic with them because they've already made up all their minds about everything. And so no new information is necessary. They are right. They are morally superior to everyone else. Yeltsin was an absolute catastrophe for Russia, catastrophe. And the irony of ironies is that probably the majority of the people that dislike Vladimir Putin in Russia have benefited materially and socially from the time that he's been in office. But they cannot accept that. They cannot accept it. Talking to a Russian liberal is like talking to a pet rock, okay? Yes. And liberals expect a pet rock to talk. I don't. All right. I mean, you get nothing. It's a useless waste of time talking to these people because they're all cliches. And believe me, over the years, I'm not going to mention names, but even on my crosstalk program, I've had producers that came in very liberal, and by the time I was done with them, they kind of went, "Well, I see your point. Okay, all right, fine." No, I mean, they're stuck in a cul-de-sac, and their caricature of the West, it's broadcast every single day on Russian language news. Okay, but they just everything's propaganda. Democracy is perfect. The European Union is perfect. Okay, no, they just bury their head in the sand. They have no idea what they're talking about. No idea what they're talking about, and don't talk to them.
All right, we got a couple of good super chats to finish it out. Peter mentioned Yeltsin from Penguins Fan. Alexander, how did Yeltsin come to power? Don't people know anything about this guy? Russia should ban liberals from office.
Well, I think a lot of Russians know an awful lot about Yeltsin, and they remember,
and his evil twin Gorbachev. Okay,
indeed, and I think they remember those times in the 1990s with profound horror. And I think it is important to remember that the liberals that we were talking about are a tiny group of people. They are almost a cult-like group who are, as Peter says, impervious to any discussion or explanation of facts, and who, like the Bourbons in France, have learnt nothing and have forgotten everything, in fact, because they still talk about the 1990s as a golden age, which it certainly wasn't for most Russians. I mean, this is one of the most ridiculous ideas. How did Yeltsin came to power? I think the reason he came to power was because the political system of the USSR in the 1980s was profoundly dysfunctional. It allowed individuals like Yeltsin to rise to positions of very, very great authority. The problems that happened in the 1980s were compounded by, I will call them mistakes. Many Russians, perhaps Peter also, will use stronger words to describe them, that Gorbachev and the claque of economists and liberals that he surrounded himself with took in the 1980s and which brought the Soviet Union to disaster.
The Harvard boys.
Harvard boys. I mean, you have to really unpack the story of the Soviet Union during that period very carefully and very closely. I'm pretty sure, by the way, that there was also a certain amount of foreign.
And we have a separate video on this. Okay, check it out.
We have a video on this, and we should do more videos on the 90s because it's an interesting topic. Yeah.
Indeed, as we're banning liberals from taking positions of power in Russia, I think it's important to remember that the liberals we're talking about, people like Gessen and Yoffe, and within Russia itself, people like Navalny and people like that, they are a very, very small number of people. As I said, I think in the parliamentary elections, they got something like 0.7%. There are other people in Russia, I mean, who have a spectrum of views, some of which may be liberal in some respects, but by no means do they share these attitudes that we are talking about. And if we're talking about this hardcore of liberals, there is no need to ban them because the Russian people will never elect them.
Nobody cares about them.
Exactly, they will never elect them. So there is no more sense in banning them than there would be in banning some rather odd and weird people that you see climbing up on soapboxes in Hyde Park Corner in London, or who no doubt speak in New York and wherever. They are not politically significant. If you're talking about people, other sort of liberal-minded people, like perhaps, Navalny, who is the head of the central bank, and people like that, they may be liberal-minded, but they are patriotic. And I don't think one should start imposing bans on people like that.
Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up from Andre. Peter, you mentioned Al-Tan, the U.S. presence being for Israel. Please discuss the elephant in the room, Israel. We've done a video on Israel and Golan Heights, actually, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
check that out as well, Andre.
This maintaining of you illegally maintaining troops in Syria, it's multidimensional. I'll make it really short here. I mean, first of all, it shows that the deep state, the Pompeos and the Boltons, they can get their way over Trump, their boss. They can defy their boss. The Pentagon never saw an occupation it didn't like. Okay, so it wants to stay there again, defying Trump. Now, the Israelis, they talk about this Shia crescent from Iran to Lebanon. That's a canard. I mean, they've been saying it for over a decade longer, and it's ridiculous here. If Iran wants to send something or anything to to Lebanon, it has airplanes. It'll fly. Okay, so it's a ridiculous thing to make the claim. And the Israelis like to show that they can influence American policy. They just stomp their foot and people react to it. So it has all these things to do with what I just mentioned. It has nothing to do with Syria. Okay, that's the country they're occupying. Okay, they don't want Assad to have control again of his sovereignty, and American troops there make it still a battlefield environment that's going to slow down reconstruction and investment in the country. It's just one big middle finger. It is so disgusting what's going on here, and the Israelis want to keep the Syria as a quagmire, okay? Because they want quagmires on their border so they can manipulate. I mean, they worked with al-Nusra, al-Qaeda type groups all through this conflict here because they wanted the conflict to keep going. They wanted an endless conflict in Syria. That was to their advantage, all right? Irrespective of the damage that it causes. And then you have somebody like Trump that is so distant from it all. They just want, okay, all right, whatever, okay? He doesn't understand the implications of these decisions, moving the embassy, giving away something that's not even his, okay, against international law. So it's really a canard about denying or not accepting defeat.
Right.
You have to pack up and leave, okay?
All right.
Okay, I think we're going to end on that, all right?
Yeah, well, we'll end on these last two. Carolyn Wiebel, the Duran is 2 hours of sanity in an insane world. Thank you for that super chat. And Alexander, very, very quickly from Penguins fan, is Maria Butina still pro-West sitting in prison? Is she still sitting in prison, guys? Do you know? Maria Butina?
She's still detained. She's still detained.
Yes.
I don't know what her conditions are, though.
There is apparently, I don't know whether one can call this good news, but apparently we are now at the first legal steps have been taken to deport her, which will mean sending her back to Russia. But can I make it very clear that this has been an utterly disgraceful affair in which, as far as I'm concerned, a completely innocent person has been coerced into a guilty plea for a crime that she never committed and which has no real reality as part of the general atmosphere and climate of hysteria, which any patriotic American who believes in the Constitution and the law should deplore.
Okay, and we'll end it on that note. Peter, what are you looking at for the week ahead?
Actually, I'm going to do a post-mortem on the Ukraine election tomorrow on Crosstalk.
Alexander, what are you keeping an eye out? Brexit. We always say the same thing.
Apart from Brexit, Ukraine is a huge story. I think this is. We must always remember that the crisis between the West and Russia hit its present critical state because of the events in Ukraine in 2014. If there is any possibility, however slight, of a movement in Ukraine away from that, then that is something that we really need to watch and keep a careful eye on. I'm not offering much hope, but I will certainly be watching what goes on there. Venezuela is another critical story. We now have yet another confrontation between Russia and the United States starting to emerge. And of course, there's the repercussions with Mueller, with the Democrats now talking about wanting to subpoena the report, which seems to be a crazy thing, given that it's going to be released anyway. That doesn't seem to be any point in that. But anyway, we're going to see, no doubt, many more dramas on this. We will see whether the steps that Peter was talking about before, about appointing a special counsel to look into this, whether any of that materializes. We will see whether these FISA warrants that we were talking about before, whether they're finally published. And of course, I have to follow Brexit because we have all sorts of things going on in the House of Commons today and all that.
One thing, I have to end on this very last note here. I don't want to see a special prosecutor. Okay, a new one, because then this is going to set a precedent that every single administration is going to be investigating its opposition. We have to stop this madness now. It's tearing the place apart. It's only going to be revenge politics. Mueller should have never been appointed in the first place. Okay, and I'm not a big fan of what Ken Starr did to Bill Clinton. Okay, as much as I despise Bill Clinton, I thought that was also a charade. Okay, we have to stop this. We have to make people obey the law. Those that break it have to be punished. We don't need these things. And on that note, I really need to go.
And on that note, we will end this live number 32. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you very much. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London, in London. Thank you very much, guys. Duran Shop, buy a t-shirt. Share the channel with everybody you know. Smash that like button. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And thank you for all your donations to us on PayPal and Patreon. We really, really appreciate it. Have a good Monday. Have a good week. Have a good April Fool's Day. And have a good month of April as well. Take care, everybody.